Hi, Tammy Silvers of Tamarini's, and thanks for joining me on another Designer Tips and Techniques virtual show, Facebook Live. Now, yes, the background behind me is completely different because I'm not in Georgia right now. I'm actually visiting my daughter in Colorado. So I had to brainstorm, what could I bring to y'all? What could I share with you here in Colorado? And then I got to thinking, my daughter has a ton of quilts that I've given her, and some of them are on in my grandson's rooms, some of them are on their beds, but some of them are hanging up. And I get this question sometimes, how do you hang your quilts? Now, you can see back here, hi Cherry, you can see back here, this is Tartary. Now, Tartary is, oh my gosh, such a popular pattern of mine, and I am thankful. Thank you so much for loving the pattern so much. And I will, just a side note, one of the things about Tartary, it was so popular that I expanded it. It has 3 size options now. So you not only have the lap quilt, which is the size that's hanging back there, but there's a crib quilt and then a much bigger quilt. But, hi April, how are you? I am so glad that y'all have dropped in. So this one is hanging up, and this is how I hang a lot of my quilts in my house as well. I use quilts as art. I don't know about y'all, but let's face it, quilting is an art form, right? And when you create that quilt, it is a piece of art. And sometimes I just want it hanging on the wall. I want to see it. So a lot of my blank space in my home has quilts hanging up, just like my daughter has. Now, how has she done this? Well, you can probably see from the picture, she's used a curtain rod, okay? So a decorative curtain rod, it's a great way to kind of accent your quilt. And I have one right here that this is a smaller one, but same thing, this is the back of the quilt, and this is a quilt sleeve. Okay, so with the quilt sleeve, now when I put the sleeves on the back of my quilts, I do it, and I'm going to give you a couple of tips about how I do mine. I'm going to do this, and usually I'm going to use 9 inches of fabric, so 9 inches wide, and then it's folded in half, and I put the raw edges right up here. So when I sew my binding on, then my binding is going to wrap around and it's going to cover that raw edge. So the only edges I have to worry about are these edges right here. And I have 2 ways that I finish them. One, if I have tons of time, okay, that's almost never, but it does happen. If I have tons of time, I'm going to hand stitch this edge down because I don't want to stitch through to the front and have that stitching showing. So I'm going to hand stitch this down. If I am running short of time, which is most of the time, I'm going to use Steam-A-Seam 2, and I'm going to cut a strip, and I'm going to run it, and this one's already stitched down, so I can't show you, but I would have it on the back side of this sleeve, and I would run it along the inside edge, and then all along here, and then steam that down. So now it's going to be fused, so that's going to hold this sleeve in place. So a sleeve runs across the quilt. Now when you put your sleeve on, you want to leave yourself hanging room. So you're going to notice that this sleeve, you see how it doesn't go all the way to the edge of the quilt, right? Because if the sleeve goes all the way to the edge of the quilt, you could run into issues with, if you don't want your curtain rod showing, if you are going to hang, I know some folks use a flat wooden slat so that the quilt hangs tight against the wall. But if you don't want that showing, you need the sleeve to give to not go all the way to the edge. Another thing I've done is, now like with this one, the sleeve is made out of some of the backing fabric. Now, it shows a little bit more because I was using leftover fabric, so the stripes are going the opposite way. But oftentimes the sleeve, if it's made out of the same fabric, you're not going to see it at all. But sometimes because I'm using leftover fabric, if I'm hanging a really big quilt, instead of one solid sleeve that's going all the way across, I actually have some of my larger quilts that need curtain rods that have a brace in the center, that I have a sleeve section here and then a gap no sleeve, and then another sleeve section. So I hope that's making sense. If it's not, you can ask me, and when I get home, I can try to find an example to show you. But so your sleeve doesn't have to be a solid piece. You can leave space for that bracket for the hanging rod, and or you can do it in chunks if you're just using leftover pieces of fabric. The whole idea is to create a pocket for that rod to go through. Okay, so that's how I do a lot of big quilts, but I also have a lot of small projects, and I like to be able to hang those myself without having to ask, and the reason I ask my husband for help is because I am known for my inability to get those anchors in really tight, and then everything wants to fall off. So I like to hang a lot of little quilts. I hang them with those very basic straight pins. So we're talking those inexpensive, they're about, some of them are this long, some of them are even shorter, but just the silver straight pins with the kind of flat heads. They're almost like teeny tiny nails. That's what I hang a lot of my small quilts with. Now, how do I do that? Well, here are a couple of small quilts that I did for my daughter. She has these hanging in one of her guest rooms, these little hearts. So they're super small, but one of the things I do is I like to use these little plastic rings. Okay, can you see those little plastic rings? And I get these in the home dec department of the big box stores like Joann's. Okay, so these are sold, these are, I think they use these for like making Roman shades and those kinds of things, but I sew the little rings on here, and then that way I can use those little straight pins like little nails and just hook these on there, and that makes it super duper easy. And I'm gonna be honest, I have quilts the size of Tartary that are hung with these little rings because at the time I made them, I didn't have sleeves on them. The other reason I like using these little rings is because when I use those little pins, now my quilt can lay flat against the wall. Now, the larger your quilt, the closer together you need to put the little rings. So these tiny little quilts, they're like roughly 8 by 10s. I've just got a ring at each corner. If I'm doing a large quilt like that and I wanted to sew the little rings on, I'm probably going to do it every 8 to 10 inches. You've got to judge based on the weight of the quilt, the size of the quilt, but you want to give adequate support. You don't want that quilt to gape up at the top. You want it to lay nice and flat, okay? But so you've got those couple of options. Putting a sleeve on the back of the quilt is going to be, it is considered the preferred method for your larger quilts. It's going to give the most support and create the least amount of stress on that quilt as you're hanging it. But if you put enough little rings across the back of your quilt, you could certainly do that same thing. If you don't put enough rings, it's going to create some pull on that quilt and some drag, and those little pins are not going to be enough to hold it. It's going to take a lot. So those are a couple of options for you. Now, while we're talking about this, I knew this was not going to take very long. Let's talk about backing. When I do these little quilts like this, okay, and actually this is one I had done for an uncle who has passed, and then the quilt, I did this. This was one of his it was a Valentine's card that I sent to him, so it came back to my daughter. When I do small quilts like this, I use leftover fabric, and this is just me, but if I know that quilt is going to be a wall hanging, it is going to spend its life hanging against the wall, I'm going to use a little bit of leftover fabric, or I'm going to use muslin on the back of the quilt, because my fabric, my pretty fabric that I paid money for, I want people to see that. And if it's going to be a wall hanging and it's just hanging against the wall, I don't necessarily need to do my quilt shop fabric there, right? Because no one's going to see it. Now, if it's going to be a table runner or something like that that's going to get use, sure. But that is one of the things, because that helps you stretch your quilting budget, right? But the other thing is, when you're doing these small quilts, if you're doing them for gifts, now I am bad. I'm going to admit, confession time, guys. I don't do labels. I know I should. I know I need to get in the habit. I really do. But, hey, do you see this? We wrote, is my uncle. We called him Nunky. And so this was our Valentine's card to him. And you can see my little Valentine greeting there to him. I wrote on the back of this. Okay. So, I mean, feel free, you know. It's permanent now, and it's part of it. Now, we have 5 minutes left. Now, I'm happy to end this here. This is just, I wanted to bring you a couple of tips because I knew that hanging quilts, how do you hang, how do you display them? I get that question a lot, so I thought this was a great opportunity to talk to you about that. But are there any questions y'all have for me? I'm happy to answer them. I know I've got a few people watching. I'm so glad you dropped by. I do hope you know that this Designer Tips and Techniques virtual show is going to be tomorrow as well. We have designers presenting tips on the hour from 12 p.m. Eastern Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I don't have the lineup memorized, but if you look at the description in the video, I have the entire lineup and links to their Facebook pages. Now, you can also go to the Designer Virtual Show and you can see, hi Sam, you can see most of the designers are sharing their Facebook Lives there as well. And you can see previous ones. So if you're new to this, did you know we started this back in, I want to say April. Did we start this back in April? I think we did. And it's still going strong. And so our plan is, as long as designers want to bring stuff to you, that we're going to do this pretty much, unless we have other catastrophic world events, we're going to bring this to you the first week of the month, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 12 Eastern Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, so please, please, please. Now, somebody contacted me saying they couldn't find the Facebook Lives. Go to the designers' pages. Please go to the designers' Facebook pages. Like their page, follow their page, share their videos. That would be awesome. Vicki, you are more than welcome. Did that answer your questions? Do you have any more? Do y'all have any questions for me? Because I would love to do some Q&A. What else? I would love to know what other types of tips that y'all need to know about. Are there any techniques you want to know about? That would give me some great ways to plan future videos. Thank you, April. I am so glad. Now, April, I think you were the one, you looked up my IGTV, my 60-second successes. I have a whole list of different topics that I'm going to be doing those videos on. So if you follow me on Instagram, if you go to the little TV icon on my feed, it's when you go to anybody's Instagram feed, the second little icon is a little TV. And if you click on that, if they have an IGTV channel, you'll see all of their videos. So I started a series called 60-Second Successes. So just like it sounds, they are little short 1-minute videos. So micro tutorials. I am hyper-focused on a single topic, such as pressing a seam open, or pressing to the side, or rotary cutting. Just really basic, really focused. So that's what those are. But if y'all have any other tips, techniques, things you would like to see on these virtual shows that we're doing every month, I would love to hear about it. And if you can't think of anything right now and you think of something later, drop it in the comments, because I always come back and look at the comments and see what people had to say, what questions they had. All right. Hey, Lori, my sister-in-law. Okay, so funny story. Lori, I'm going to tell a funny story about you. People always ask, how did I get into quilting? And it was my sister-in-law. She did it. She was the one that said, come take a quilt class with me. And I'm going to be honest, and I tell this in my quilt lectures when I do this, I was not that keen on the idea at the time. It was like, okay, I'll do it, but I don't know. And I made a really, really ugly quilt top. Still have it, because I like to look at it sometimes and go, okay, I could be doing worse, because that was what I made first. But she is the one that got me started into all of this. So thanks to my sister-in-law, mwah, I have a passion for quilting now, an obsession, my husband would say. So, and my sister-in-law, Lori, is a brand new grandmother. So I have 2 grandchildren that I'm with right now, but she has a beautiful grandbaby as well. He is absolutely gorgeous. So Just saying. Haven't gotten to hold him yet. This whole COVID thing is messing stuff up. But, all right, so guys, I appreciate you stopping in. Like I said, tomorrow, be sure, look at the schedule, visit all of those designers, go to their Facebook pages, follow them, share the videos, and until next time, happy stitching.